Welcome, Bitcoiners. Pardon the maybe minute delay we had today. Let me make sure my audio is coming in good. I'll be honest, I'm feeling a little under the weather today. I don't know what's going on. Feels like the ships are not a healthy environment. Even though I sleep with the door open and all that, nothing crazy, just like achy everywhere. But we're gonna live. We got a ton of energy, and we're ready to go. Breakup, and Bitcoin's running. And all that's left to do is talk about all the aliens, the other stuff that's new. Morning, Boo Boo. Morning, Boo Boo. Hey, morning, Dave. Yes, indeed. We're having a good morning. So, a lot of news, right? A lot of news today. Lots of stuff going on. When I was looking for my fakest news of the day, right? When I go looking for my fakest news of the day, I don't need to go too far, right? I don't need to go too far. But today, I got to go to our favorite, the New York Times, right? Here's what they're offering us, right? The incursions, so they're talking about all of the UFOs, right? The UFO weekend. The incursions seem to become so common that the Biden administration officials have found themselves issuing private assurances that there is no evidence that they involve extraterrestrial activity. There's no evidence, right? But officials also acknowledge privately that the longer they are unable to provide a public explanation for the provenance of objects, the more speculation grows. Did they just tell us really what they're thinking? Did they actually report the news today? Accident? Was that an accident? Did they actually say that the more unclear they are, the more speculation go? Sometimes right by accident. I saw one where the United States government, yesterday started talking about giving people Medicaid and Medicare for their food. Finally, they've come up with the right answer. Because guess what? What you eat has to do with your health. They're finally figuring it out. Are they figuring out that we're being run with this UFO story in order to create speculation? Who knows? We can't imagine what they're going to say. We can't imagine what they're thinking. We can't imagine what they're thinking. But in this case, no aliens. Don't worry about it, guys. Right? Sometimes they get it right. Right? It made me think, though. Just about the nature of the incentive systems around food and diet when I read that story. Because, this is actually big news, right? CNN reported it, that Medicaid could be used for American expenditures on food, and the New York Times also wrote about it, right? So they seem to have stumbled upon actual health news. And I wonder, right, if it's possible to stumble blindly into these things and then embrace them, right? The New York Times also was writing about, maybe not stumbling blind, but it looks like they're after the big ones here: food insecurity, health, right? Now here in this article, they're talking about, and they bring a professor. Now, remember, we were underlining how the best economists in America, failed, not even in the ballpark, about employment numbers in 1 month, right? So we talked about how they had projected the January employment numbers. These are the top economists in the world, right? They had projected January employment numbers in America to be in like the 100 range. Turned out to be 500,000, right? So they're not even in the same ballpark. They're in a different planet. And we talked about how this should question the nature of the job of economists and the profession that it is that they study, and the science that they study. And the New York Times might get it right with the healthcare finally, right? That food and actually has to do with your health. Here's one where they're actually going with an economist, and he's suggesting something. Well, it might be a little uncouth, might be a little unacceptable to people. So what's he suggesting? A Yale economics professor has some ideas for how to deal with the burdens of Japan's rapidly aging society. The only solution, he said, is a mass suicide of the elderly, including ritual disembowelment. So now here's the thing about this, and a lot of people talking about it today. A Yale professor suggested mass suicide for old people in Japan. What did he mean? Trying to read into his point of view and maybe try to decipher what he's saying. First of all, what I'm going to say is the professor himself is from Japan, right? So he's not someone else telling the Japanese to kill themselves, and it's a Japanese guy who's a Yale economics professor. Remember, they can't even predict job numbers in 1 month, the best of them. This is just a professor at Yale, and he's saying he has the whole thing figured out, Japan's future, and a bunch of people should kill themselves, right? That's what he's arguing. First of all, you got to see his picture because I think it sums up everything you need to know about the guy. He's wearing glasses. One of the lenses is a square and one is a circle, and he's in a purple kind of bright jacket. And he does my favorite thing. You know, when these people always in their journalistic things or their profile pics, they look into the distance, you know, contemplating the beautiful future and their stoic reserve and their looking into the horizon of the cathedral they've built in their minds, right? All the Japanese people, ritual suicide. I'm just the poor guy who had to say it, right? So you see this guy, and it brings me back to what we were talking about family structure a little while ago from What is Alt Hist, a great YouTube channel if you never watch it. Young guy does the best videos just about, you know, different alternate histories and different ways to look at history. Really interesting stuff. He's really stupid on Bitcoin, fortunately. But other than that, he's a smart fella. One day he'll turn. He's a young guy, he doesn't really get it. So he made a video a little while ago that taught me a bunch of new stuff that I didn't know. And it is that family structure of whatever area of the planet, whatever geographical area we're talking about, has way more to do with the society that ends up getting produced there. And he showed that the places that have absolute primogeniture, that means the firstborn male gets everything and everybody else just has to deal with it. So in history, right? It's not always that way any longer in France and Germany, but still quite a bit, right? So Quebec being a large example of this. And as someone who came from Quebec and spent a lot of time in South Korea and Japan, I lived in both places and did also spend a lot of time in Germany. Weirdly, the places that have the super primogeniture, so the firstborn male gets everything, all share certain qualities of their politics, i.e. they were the actual fascist map of the world, right? So the logic that the What If Altist guy uses, and it's a book by a French guy who in the 60s or 70s in his video, all about how it creates a situation where the males that aren't the firstborn understand that society is sort of random and they have to excel in order to make their way in the world. They have to be really accomplished. So it creates a lot of peacock males, really talented males, right? And that live in an environment that just understands that things aren't fair and they have to just live with it, right? Fairness is something for children and stupid people just to talk about, right? It's not a real thing. This is not a thing you can measure in the world, right? It's just something people say when they have nothing else to say about a certain situation. And these folks who have dealt with it in Japan and France and Germany and Quebec have also built all kinds of weird offshoots because the whole hand out and be successful and accomplish something so that your life is meaningful. And you look at this economist, right, and you see all the markings of ambition and trying to stick out of the crowd. This study, of course, is not serious, right? He's saying it, right, that they should kill themselves, but obviously no one's ever going to take this thing seriously, especially coming from a guy who's got literally has one square lens and one circle lens. And it's no surprise that fashion in the world actually also graphs onto this fascist map, right? That fashion and people's style and desire to stick up at Japan, Korea, these are some of the most stylish places in the world. Quebec, where I'm from, right? It's, when I went to college outside of Quebec and I saw everyone wearing jogging pants to class, I was shocked. I mean, literally shocked, right? We never had anything like that in Quebec. The idea was absurd. The girls would get up 2-3 hours before class just to get ready to come to school. That was normal, right? Men as well, all kinds of guys, already 20 years ago wearing makeup to school. I saw that regularly. Guys that would hide their acne or pimples or whatever, right? And would go to school and, have to look good. Like there was no excuse growing up in Quebec for not looking good at school. And it's kind of the same in Japan and kind of the same in Korea. And even here on this boat that I'm on, it's French, right? Everyone on this boat is French. The boat itself is from Italy, and most of the people sailing are French. And you'd be surprised, right? Just going around the cafeteria, the way people dressed and dressed up nice, very not the same as America, right? Very much what that country is all about. So, you get this economist saying this stuff. Cernovich covered it. Right? He covered this article in the New York Times and says, today the New York Times escalates its hateful rhetoric by suggesting through a surrogate that Japanese people begin committing mass suicide. And then Cerno says, Cerno, it's a thought experiment. Don't worry. Right, sure thing. The next time you're in a college classroom or office job, suggest the elderly should consider suicide for the good of society. See how that goes for you. Really, if you want to come at me with ridiculous defenses of evil, then put your money where your mouth is. Test it out. You won't, because you know what will happen. And here he's talking about how Japan has always been this lightning rod for doomsday predictions, especially from economists, right? Japan's population has been the source of doomsday predictions for decades, and yet the country is incredibly functional and advanced. Western NGOs, the same ones targeting Elon Musk, he says, are obsessed with regime change style meddling in Japan. Japan is smart to ignore us, right? Talking about anti-Japan propaganda, he highlights here from Bloomberg just the other day. We talked about on the show. Japan as a country is getting older and less populous. That's straining its economy. The world is watching for a solution. He's got another one, all kinds of articles just about how much trouble Japan is in. This is a writer named Matt Katz who was there. I spent 6 weeks in Japan reporting on a thing that doesn't get much attention. The thousands of asylum seekers from across the world fly into Tokyo. Almost none win legal refugee status. Many get detained, and so I find out why and what it means. Cernovich, the goal, as should be clear, is to make Japan an open borders country, which Japan refuses to become. So the article goes on to predict that other people will be targeted in the same way for, less than nice treatment, right? And, what it makes me think of is what more or less is happening in China that I've mentioned a few times, right? So, and how similar things are becoming in America now, and I'll explain. So, we were talking during the Chinese lockdowns for COVID and the protests that went on a few months ago around Christmas time, that China had abdicated all orientation and direction for economic growth as the primary, psychological vehicle for the people to move forward. That economic growth was being abandoned because it was no longer possible, so they had to resort to something else, which is where we started to discuss that probably President Xi is the only one who really understands the demographic position of China, right? That it's much older than they said, that the economy is smaller and not quite as powerful and large as reported in the past. We talked a lot about the University of Chicago study that calculated lumen hours, so the amount of light at night from satellites that are a better proxy for economic growth. And what they did was they just chart the economic growth reported by capitalist market force dominated economies like the United States and those in Europe with the growth of nightlight, and that if they are somewhat parallel, you have a better indication that the numbers on economic growth are accurate. And what they did with China is show, and all autocratic governments that report their own economic growth, showed that the lumen hours at night went up nowhere near the amount that their economy went up. So they were able to determine that it's likely a lie up to about 60% total, like 60% less large than they say it is. And it made me think at the time, and it's something we talked about a lot on the show, that China had basically given up on that other side of motivating the population through economic growth, that it was just going to be pure chauvinistic, authoritarian system in order to move forward. There's no way to coerce everyone with market forces, that actual force needed to be used. Market force is gone, actual autocratic force in order to perpetuate the society forward. And of course, this is a common theme when societies unravel and fall apart. It's not the first time. What if Alt Hist, the same guy who I mentioned, did this video series on the different family relationships and how they create the actual political situation in that country, also did one recently on this shift and predicted it for America, that America was headed to a place where it was going to have to choose whether it was a market force dominated or if it was going to have to rely on actual force in order to perpetuate forward. That a choice was coming and couldn't be in both camps. You could either have market forces or force itself. And when you start thinking of, all these different countries, China and America, and how a lot of them are actually up against the same choice right now, right? You had the entire context around what's going on with the Ohio situation and Nord Stream pipeline, right? That more or less we're not really getting a clear picture of both the dangers and failures that occurred around the Ohio explosion that we talked about quite a bit yesterday. And we're not really getting an accurate picture or conversation or dialogue around anything that had to do with the Nord Stream pipeline. Everything has sort of been ignored over the past few days. And here's Der Spiegel, the so-called great newspaper of Germany, just a few months ago talking about Seymour Hersh, right? This is the way they described him just a few months ago. And Seymour Hersh is the fellow who broke the Nord Stream pipeline story that Americans and the CIA did it just last week. So they say Chicago-born Seymour Hersh will be there. Legendary American investigative journalist who became world famous in 1969 for exposing the massacre by U.S. soldiers in the Vietnam village of My Lai. In 2004, he was a journalist who exposed the torture of Iraqis by U.S. personnel at Abu Ghraib prison in Baghdad. So they were saying legendary. This is not long ago, right? This is not long ago at all. And this is from just the other day. The controversial U.S. journalist Seymour Hersh writes in a poorly documented blog post that the U.S. blew up the Nord Stream pipelines. Russian propaganda is already using the claim for its own purposes. And Pelmeni Pusha on Twitter writes, how the Western media presents you before and after agreeing with the Russian media. In 2016, Spiegel introduced Pulitzer Prize winner Seymour Hersh as the legendary American investigative journalist. Now in 2023, and after publishing that the U.S. government sabotaged the Nord Stream, as the Russian media had already announced, Spiegel introduced him as a controversial American journalist, Seymour Hersh. We have gone from legendary to controversial. Who are the right? And indeed, if you think about the situation now, there's a story out there where a journalist in Ohio trying to cover the gas leak there was arrested. Now, the chief of police already said that was a mistake, so we're going to give the police and the authorities a little bit of the benefit of the doubt when it comes to actually letting people report on it. We're not going to say they went out and beat down anyone who's trying to report it. But the one fella that did try was arrested. Now, journalists could do their job and they could take readings and see what's happening because this cloud is quite large, right? It's now stretching over a large area. But it doesn't look like they're going to be doing that, right? If there's going to be anyone who's following this up to any meaningful extent. So what does it mean, right? What does it mean that no one's even looking it up and that no one's really talking about it? There were folks that said they were in Cincinnati yesterday, right nearby, talking with folks that are there. They haven't heard it, right? So if you only get your news from the mainstream news, you would not know that this cloud is there, right? The gate porters told what for? Yeah, exactly. Now, look, it's a really bad look. And if you listen to what Cernovich is saying, that there's going to be more of this autocratic crackdown on any opposing point of view, right? We've seen it. If Nord Stream is any indication, if what we're experiencing in discussing media collusion with government entity any indication, right? We are headed for this choice, exactly as what if Halt has predicted, that America is going to have to choose whether it's oriented by market forces, or if it actually forces people to do stuff, right? And that's really what World War III is turning into. It's turning into this psychological game of, can I make my own decisions, and can I navigate my way through the world? Can I imagine a future and work towards it, or do I have to have one prescribed and my role assigned, and any deviation gets criticized, right? So that's the tension we're now living with. And um, you've got Hillary Clinton, right? Hillary Clinton, who's starting to make noise again. Right? Some people think she's going to try and run against Biden in uh, the election next year. Well, she was in India, and I couldn't find the exact quote. It says the article is fact checked, right? It says the article is fact checked. But she was in India talking about her partnership with a cryptocurrency group, Algorand, right? Silvio Macaulay, another one of these another one of these fancy award winners. I've met him a few times. So they're going to be working together, and her plan is to ban cash to fight climate change. So they're going to ban cash to fight climate change. She doesn't really explain what she means by it, right? She just says she's going to ban cash to fight climate change, and that's the headline they took away. So, of course, Americans now have another person who, remember, Hillary Clinton spent Thanksgiving 2021, right? Thanksgiving 2021. You remember Bitcoin was mooning, the whole market was going crazy, and Thanksgiving just has become a traditional weekend in the United States in November to talk about Bitcoin. Don't ask me why. It started in 2017, one of the major run-ups to the third Bitcoin cycle in 2017. The high that came in December was propelled by Thanksgiving 2017, where apparently, and it was my impression as well, everyone in the world was talking about Bitcoin. I had planned a show for CoinDesk just after that weekend. We all got together on the Tuesday after the Thanksgiving weekend, and that was the day Bitcoin first crossed the $10,000 mark. And it was what everyone in the world was talking about, and everyone had come to that event just after Thanksgiving, said, it's all I've been talking about. Every one of my family members was talking about it. You even heard Christopher Giancarlo, who was the head of the CFTC at the time, meant the same thing when hearings began in the Senate just a few months later, saying, hey, look, I couldn't believe we've done everything to try and get kids, young people, to be interested and financially literate. And suddenly all of my kids come home from college over Thanksgiving and can't stop talking about Bitcoin. That's where he earned that title, Bitcoin Dad or Crypto Dad or whatever they called him, because he was just impressed by the financial literacy aspect, that people were starting to understand things that others had tried to teach for years unsuccessfully, and all of a sudden you had people who were motivated by themselves, right? Market forces inducing people to be interested in a subject because it benefits them, not being forced as you would in a school top-down environment to learn about financial literacy, instead having your own innate sense compelling you to do these things, right? Which is why I continue to think that Bitcoiners are optimist, right? There isn't really a logical way forward. It's forward by intuition and forward by a sense of which direction we should head in. And the reason we have that is because, truthfully, the crypto economics of Bitcoin, right? Crypto economics is a real thing, right? And it has nothing to do with crypto. Forget about crypto for a second when I mentioned crypto economics. Crypto economics are a subcategory of engineering, not of economics. Remember, in my frame, and I share this openly, and I hope everyone copies it, right? Because I think it is the better frame to use when trying to analyze politics and economics and what's going on, and Bitcoin, engineering, politics, economics, all three of those subjects. Here's the way I tend to break it down, right? The academic way is to say there's such thing as macroeconomics and microeconomics. Fake. There's no such thing, right? There's economics, which are just choices that we all make. It's just choices. It's market forces inducing choices. And the other one, economics, that people say, right? So microeconomics is just economics. Macroeconomics, that they say, is the large flows of capital around the world and all of these things, that's politics. They're not the same thing, right? Politics and economics are separate. You can split economics up linguistically, but that's just thinking with words. It's not real, right? Now, everyone accepts that they're real because we understand the words and they mean something and we're able to communicate that way, but it doesn't actually exit laboratory, if you will, right? It doesn't play out very well in the real world, and I don't think it will going forward, right? Austrian school folks, I think, are going to win this debate easily because the truth is economics are a psychological engine and they're not math. They're taught as math because the numbers look more similar in macroeconomics and they look more similar in microeconomics, but the math is irrelevant, right? It's what perpetuates forward. Is it market forces in a market economy, or is it a top-down authoritarian structure, right? You can get incentivized systems for either, right? Either will create incentivized systems that perpetuate forward, but how much, at what speed, at what confidence do they go forward, right? So there's economics, which are macro, micro, not real. That's politics and economics. Now, crypto economics is just economics like you always knew. There's nothing different about crypto economics. It's choices. However, what they are about as a subcategory of systems design, as a subcategory of engineering, they're about the choices that go into engineering a network. We know crypto economics exist because of Bitcoin. Bitcoin proved crypto economics because independently people work together to build this network, right? For their own selfish motivations, right? The part of crypto economics wants selfishness to exist because it understands human nature, right? It's betting in nature. It's not trying to coerce humans to do something they don't want to do or wouldn't do naturally. It's betting on our selfish nature and using that force and direction to perpetuate the entire network. So crypto economics are still just economics. They're a subcategory of engineering, and they're about system design, and the incentives go into making something perpetuate forward, right? So how do we know? How do we know that this crypto economic force and the pure market that allow the psychological conditions to perpetuate forward, how do we know those are going to win over the autocratic ones? We don't really, right? We don't really know, but inevitably humans are going to want their own. They're going to want to be safe. They're going to want to be well fed. They're going to want to be healthy, right? And when you look at is happening in when you look at what's happening in Turkey right now, right, you can start to see exactly how this system can fall apart and how this autocratic force of top-down structures are on its legs and probably are going to continue to shed adherence and consistently not able to gather enough people, even with the narrative machine in overdrive. It won't gather enough people in order to perpetuate for it. So what's going on in Turkey is the following, and this is where everyone is now going to be talking about the political reasons why the death toll is so large after the earthquake in Turkey. So this is what it looks like, right? This is from War in Ukraine Yet, 2003 earthquake and exercise interruption. Let's talk more about these extremely sketchy construction amnesties and what they offered. In very simple terms, the Turkish government allowed constructors to be retroactively exempt from buildings with a small fee. The scheme netted more than $3 billion to the central government, all while 50% of buildings in Turkey were built in violation of seismic regulations. Just a few days before the earthquake, a draft law was proposed to Parliament which would grant further amnesty. Circling back to 2020 and the destruction in Izmir, a report from the BBC revealed that 672,000 buildings had benefited from construction amnesty. The Riza Bay apartment, for example, was built on a marsh with poor materials, yet was granted an amnesty along with many more, so that one collapsed. Since 1948, these zoning amnesty laws have been passed 19 times, netting billions to the country's coffers and popularity to the government. The Minister of Urban Planning even commented that pardoned buildings don't have to be durable or solid, unsurprisingly. Let's quickly touch on the earthquake tax, right? Roughly speaking, earthquake tax is an additional tax on a number of financial transactions, from paying income tax to purchasing plane tickets. Created in order to fund a disasters fund, this tax has come under scrutiny. That's because the money generated has been continually misused, right? So they go on to just explain how bad this catastrophe has been, how bad this catastrophe became, because policies are just totally not incentivized to make anyone safe. Now, remember, most people were incentivized into this autocratic top-down structure, not market forces, because they don't think market forces are going to ever save you, right? Oh, what are we supposed to do about security? Oh, what are we supposed to do about building codes? These are literally the things that people cite as reasons to have centralized authority and democratic institutions that have a top-down structure in order to provide these things that otherwise would never be incentivized into reality, right? So it's this idea that only a government can incentivize folks to do the right thing, when we see time and time again that's not what's happening. That's not even close to what's happening. Now, if we think that Turkey's corruption is the big story here, right? Turkey's building code corruption being the big story, hold on a second. The more disgusting story in all of this is what's going on in Syria. What's going on in Syria is because they were part of the ISIS, all that stuff. Remember that whole war that America had just a few years ago? There's a ton of sanctions on Syria, right? So Syria is still a country that is sanctioned heavily. Bashir, right? Bashir al-Assad, the guy who runs it. America tried regime change there under the Obama administration. They got ISIS, and things didn't really work out. They had a caliphate, if you remember, that erupted in the area. Caliphate, right? That was doing some of the most horrendous stuff you've ever seen in your life. And where did that come from? Of course, that came from American regime change that happened 10 years before that. And Glenn Greenwald was talking today, right? So the reason why, and only really, is in a way, sanctions is going to help Syria in their earthquake recovery. No one has helped them until now. Nobody. No one has shut up. Turkey's getting a lot of help, right? Syria, none. Zero. Nothing. Why? Why? Even Italy had to go to Beirut in order to get to Syria because they can't land airplanes anymore. All of it's gone, right? They're not allowed. So Glenn Greenwald today was talking all about how bad the propaganda machine was in the lead up to the Iraq war, which has led to these consequences, which has led to this world where we can't even go help Syria and Syrians when they have one of the worst natural disasters we've ever seen, right? So we were hoodwinked into going to that venue, Iraq, right? People we know now had no connection to 9/11, yet 9/11 was used. And all the people who joined in to make this happen, Jeffrey Goldberg, who Glenn Greenwald has been railing on for a while now, got as a reward for agreeing with the regime that the weapons of mass destruction, he got as a reward, according to Glenn Greenwald. We don't know why he got it. He could have earned it, right? That he was given the Atlantic and the editor-in-chief responsibilities, and that basically anyone who helps perpetuate the official narrative lines will get rewarded, right? So this is where we're at, right? This is where we're at. We're now clearly at this precipice between market forces and being able to discover and prove that we can do stuff. Now, we have still never proven, right, in a way that everyone will see, that our system of incentives and voluntarism and anarcho-capitalism can work, right? There's very few examples of anarcho-capitalism functioning at all. People say, how do we build the roads, right? Which is why I think Bitcoiners have to get involved in proving voluntarism works as a force to build actual civil engineering, right? We talk about all this engineering stuff, the buildings falling apart. They're worried about in Japan, more or less, is that the country will not be able to be held together, right? They're not going to be able to hold this thing together because too many old people, right? So all kinds of things have to come and be created in order for us to make a better world, right? And what I think, right, that's why I'm such a big fan of proving voluntarism works. I'm a proponent of the Nakamoto Trail, right? How do we know World War II ended in America? We know World War II ended in America because we built the Eisenhower highway network, a engineering. We regained civility, right? Civilized things were being built. We cannot do civilized things anymore, right? We let huge toxic clouds cover our people. We let huge buildings and entire strips of city fall apart and have no seismic resistance because of corruption, right? Follow the money. It's very clear. The cities got paid for this. The top-down structure that was supposed to provide safety provided the opposite because the incentives were so misaligned. And whatever easy logic and easy rationale you can use to imagine top-down structures giving a net benefit is now having one of the best ways to doubt whether or not that system works has just happened, right? We can now observe it. And so if we continue to think about what we need to do as Bitcoiners, it is proving that we can build things without coercion, without force, and they should involve of civility, like a electric network that is paid for by volunteers and would allow us to a gift to people, which is the ease of imagining that market forces can build physical things that make our life better, right? Things in the real world. And I think a bike trail would be one of those things, right? I think a bike trail would be one of those things. So the dude says, what's even crazier about 9/11 in the Middle East is finding out that, well, here's the thing about Osama bin Laden. So do you guys know Lawrence Wright? Lawrence Wright? Lawrence Wright is the guy who wrote Going Clear or something about Scientology. So he was a Hollywood writer. He wrote The Siege. If anyone saw that book or anyone read that or saw that movie, The Siege, with Denzel Washington from the late 90s, and he chose like this, I'll make the bad guys Arab terrorists. He didn't mean it. Like, he just was like, oh, right. I need a villain, sort of. It was the late 90s, so like the Russians were out of style. He went there, boom. So his co-writer was, I believe, assassinated for this, right? So it made him really want to understand what was going on. He just didn't understand why anyone would be so angry with him. So when 9/11 happened, he moved to Saudi Arabia and started investigating all this stuff. And it's a book called The Looming Tower. The Looming Tower. And I recommend reading it. It's a whole history of the Saud family, right? I don't know who knows about the Saud family very much. It's an amazing story. Ibn Saud had 50-something male children. And MBS is the first generational change from Ibn over in like 1910 or something. So from 1910, because he had 50-something kids, there was never a generation. It was all just his children. MBS is the first grandkid of that to come in, Mohammed bin Salman. So also get a sense of exactly what the bin Laden family was up to. It's quite interesting. So the bin Laden family, Osama's father, he made his money this way. So when Ibn, the father, not Ibn, the first one who took over was a really big, kind of fat, sultanate almost, right? I don't know if that's the right term to use. Obviously, it's not from Saudi, but he lived large, let's say, right? And what he wanted, no kidding, was a driveway that went from his bed outside so he could roll out of bed and get into his Rolls Royce and leave. He hired bin Laden's dad. And bin Laden's dad made a point to say, it's embarrassing, right? It's embarrassing that Arabia doesn't have its own excavators and dump trucks and cement trucks. And it's embarrassing that we have to ask the Americans because we don't have any of this equipment. The Americans were coming in to build everything. So Ibn, not Ibn, I forget the name of the first boy, the first one who took over. But he asked bin Laden's dad, start a construction company, right? Start a construction company. He was from Yemen. The father was from Yemen. There was no countries back then, though, in that area. It was all just tribes and nomads and things like that. So he goes, and the dad ends up creating this construction company, which becomes one of the biggest in the world. He rebuilds Muhammad's actual mosque which is on the way to Mecca. He rebuilds Mecca, and he rebuilds, I think, Iraq. I think he built 2 of 3 of the highest, holiest sites in Islam. And if I'm not mistaken, he also did some stuff in Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, but I don't know about that one. I know for a fact he built a house right next to Bin Laden, or to Muhammad's, peace be upon him, Muhammad's home, Muhammad's mosque on the way to Mecca, right? And it was a real meeting ground. Everyone who was making the pilgrimage to Mecca would come and visit him there, right? So here's what ended up happening. He had a son who was a CIA guy, the oldest son. He's the one who was friends with the Bushes, but he was very pro-America. He loved America. He had sunglasses, his own jet. The father, Bin Laden, died. The son was the one who got Osama hooked up. Osama, his mother, came from the Bashir al-Assad world in Syria, and she had been given to another one of his employees after they had Osama. He gave that fourth wife. She was the rotating wife. Gave her to his staff, which was a real honor, and that staff could then raise Osama and have more kids. Totally normal in this world that creates family ties, and again, we're talking about family stuff, about France and Germany and Italy, France and Germany and Quebec and Japan and Korea, right? So this part of the world also has these family structures, and it leads to different results. And one of them is, families that are connected, and everyone knows their spot and are well sort of acclimatized to different family environments. And so the big mystery with Osama bin Laden is how much was he with his brother or not with his brother. So that's the CIA part we don't really know, right? We don't really know. Even Lawrence Wright couldn't really figure it out, because Osama was kicked out of Saudi Arabia because he went and said, we do not need other countries defending us from Saddam Hussein. We, as a jihadist, he said, as a form of jihad, should expel Saddam Hussein. We don't need the Americans. And that was the big reason he was kicked out of Saudi Arabia, right? Because he did it. Now, I don't know everything about what went on there. I think that book is pretty accurate, and I like it. But, I could be wrong. So he was with the CIA, but it was more his brother, is my understanding. Right? The Naked Communist book from the mid-20th century explains how much of the collectivist plan to take over the West and why we need the world. I'll check that out, Brandon. Thanks for the stuff. The dude, loose ends got to be tied up somehow, yeah. Bechtel, Bush, and Bin Laden. Quite a story. It sure is, Daniel. Yeah, it sure is. Osama, yeah, the U.S. They might be. Yeah, they might be. They're not haram. That's for sure. Those guys. Well, Osama, he had. If you look at him, he is really recognizable to Christians. Honestly, if you look at the way Lawrence writes about him, he would have fit in exactly like any of these Christian kids. Like he rejected his father up the wives and all that. Like his whole thing was to not divorce, right? You keep your 4 and you're not fornicating and all that. He had a lot of things that I think, especially now that a lot of Christian minds have changed over the past few years, right? They're not as hyped up on anti-Muslim stuff as they once were. I've spoken with Christians who said, I didn't know that Bin Laden's temperament was so calm, right? It was really a calm guy, not a crazy person, that's for sure. So that surprises people. All right, Tima, I'm feeling a little under the weather today. My energy was a little low. I don't know what I got. It feels like the aches and pains of, I don't know what, not healthy environments. I'm going to get some exercise in today, and I should feel rejuvenated. So thanks for sticking with me today. And it's all about incentives, guys. The good news is, right, crypto economics can build a better future, and we don't need force, right? We finally have the recipe, right? We finally have the recipe. All right, peace.